Hi, I'm David Diethelm. I am a featured artist for May of 2026 at New Zone Gallery in Eugene, Oregon. So the creative flow generally starts by getting into the right mindset. And the first painting indicates the starting to think about art and not be critical and things like that, which then leads to sprinkle. And Rick Rubin, the author and music producer, wrote a book recently called The Creative Act, I think. And his metaphor is seeds, where you come up with a little bit of an idea, which then leads to something else. So I'm using the cloud and rain and water flow metaphor for my series. And this is my seed. The sprinkle leads to a lot more rain. And in runoff, you start to see the first indications of the thin paint that I've used as part of the process of creating most of these paintings. In some of them it is just the underpainting, and in others it's most of the painting. In this one, you only see a little bit of it in the rain there, and then you see the runoff coming off here, which then flows down and actually goes down the river. So this was the first one. I did this before this one. I just used very thin paint, but without any drips. And then a shower is done with very thin paint in two different layers. This one was painted first, and then another was painted over it to give a background and a foreground, and then having the paint drip down. And it works very nicely because those drips, they land on this work, Icebergs Melting in Rain. And this is done in a different way. This is very, very thick paint mixed with cold wax. And I did a wet on wet process where the background was wet, and then I put on large slatherings of white paint and then put solvent on the top of it, which then runs off and creates these fantastic patterns. And then I used a spray bottle to spray little drips here and there to indicate the rain. So Suns in Rain is a really good example of the thin paint flowing and separating as it flows, creating a really wonderful pattern. And this painting was a one shot. I couldn't have redone this pattern of things because you can't scrape it off afterwards. So it had to work the first time, and it did. Everything about this one came together really nicely. And I would consider this to be peak flow of creativity. Everything is just right in my mind. Very happy with this one. The good examples of the dripping paint, creating these very organic patterns that would be nearly impossible to do by hand. And instead, you're using gravity to create patterns that are really subtle. So this painting, which I entitled Driptych, a little play on words on diptych, made with two canvases, where I decided that I wanted to have a taller painting, and I didn't have a taller canvas, so I made a diptych. And the subtitle of this one is Conflagration, and it's maybe more therapeutic than anything. It a lot of fire and smoke and ash, but I still like it because it's really great. rivulets and glowing indications, and it just has a really nice energy to it. It's something that this process really helps with, which is to retain the light coming from the white canvas, because it has a kind of semi-transparent quality to it in some places. Cloud Cathedral is a fun painting. It started out with just simply trying to have a vertical quality to the painting, and it gradually grew and grew with these interesting textures that turned into plants. And then I thought, well, you know, in the clouds we have this light coming through the clouds. Why don't I really accentuate that and emphasize it and turn it into something cathedral-like? And then I realized that this pattern could be mirrored down here, which makes a nice pairing. And you can read many things into this. It could be the universal energy around us. It could be something religious. It could be naturalistic. It could be just inspired by Monet. The Deluge is a really good example of the qualities that you can get with paint, very thin paint that is allowed to slide down the canvas using gravity. It creates a really nice transparency in places, and you can have a background and a foreground, and it's very spontaneous. It's a lot like watercolor. And then collision coalescence, technical term for rain. This one was done after this one, I believe. And it's a good example of painting very spontaneously. I painted the background first with very thin paint and didn't focus on adding details. But little things like that popped up. They looked like houses, so I left them. And this happened to be darker, and that worked out perfectly because it's a shadow. And this is a good example of not overworking the paint. Despite the Rain is another exploration of textures using a spray bottle with solvent in it, spraying little dots that then spread and create a great texture of rain, in quotes. And I then reacted to that by adding these flowers and sprayed a little bit of solvent on it so that it would spread nicely and create little glows. And I like the way this one turned out. This is also another good example of not overworking it. There would be times in the past where I would have gone back and added little things here and there or overworked the foreground, and I didn't do that, and I'm happy I didn't do that. Somebody else is happy I didn't do that. Trees Ablaze is probably the most spontaneously painted painting of this group. It was done all at once, and there was a little bit of a pause for this background to dry, but I liked the very loose, grainy texture of that to then paint the trunks over and then add the yellow and tip the canvas and have it just run. So this one, called All That Glows on Earth, is a painting that I did right after Suns and Rain. And it was an attempt to continue the energy of the previous painting. it is somewhat successful, but not as successful. I do like some of the nice little details that emerged in the grass, kind of like Albert Dürer, my little homage to Dürer, I think. And the glow, I like the glow in this one, the little details in the flowers, especially that one. Early Life is a little doodle that I did before I did the Icebergs painting. I was experimenting with wet on wet. So the blue background was wet when I painted the white life forms. And I like it. It's very spontaneous, and it helped me get into the flow for that day. So Odyssey, New Horizons, was done before the majority of the pieces in this show. And the interesting thing about it, the reason that I included it in the show, is because I ordered some paint from a different manufacturer, and when I tried it out, it was a lot thinner than my usual paint that I use. And I noticed that it really had a big impact on my painting style. So I put that back in the back of my mind, and when I started thinking about this series, it informed a lot of the decisions that I made painting it. The show runs until the end of May 2026. We're at the corner of Oak and 11th. We have 68 artists showing in this gallery. And in addition to that, we have a featured show by an artist, a photographer, in the Klaus Meyer room. And we have the Echo School showing a special show here. And in addition, K.F. Gregory is the other featured artist. Check out newzonegallery.org.